Hi, you're very welcome to our second of our TA Talks. I'm Holly Fawcett from Social Talent, and today I am with Charu Malhotra, who is the employer branding head of Ferrero. Charu, you're most welcome. Thank you so much for having this chat. So how on earth did you get to Ferrero as an employer branding head?
Thanks, Holly. So in terms of my role at Ferrero, how do I get there? I've worked in employer branding for about 8 years now. Started off as a recruiter and was very lucky that throughout my roles I've been heavily immersed in digital, social media, recruitment capability. And when it comes to brand building, it was sort of a natural journey to sort of move into employer branding. But this is my third role in the whole branding space.
Wow. So I believe you were at Unilever before you came to Ferrero. So what did you do with Unilever? You were there for a few years.
Yeah, sure. So actually, I came from Primark. After Unilever, I went to Primark, which I can talk about in a moment, and then have landed at Ferrero, which is really exciting. But my role at Unilever was a fabulous one, really, because when I joined, and this is going back at least of 6.5, 7 years, I was hired initially for about a 6-month period to look at what we should be doing on social media, because from a talent and a recruitment perspective, we were doing nothing. And as I said, this is going back a number of years now. It's a whole different tapestry, as we both know. But the first 3 months was thinking about what do we want to do on social, why do we want to do it, and which channels. And those 6 months quickly became 3.5 years, where I ended up creating our strategy, choosing which channels, selecting an agency partner to work with, and most importantly, deciding how to work with our other functions, marketing, IT, communications, digital, brand teams, and crucially making sure that the countries that I was working with, which were about 35, understood, it's not about just creating a channel, it's about content. So yeah, it's really exciting, but it was starting from scratch. And if you look at Unilever now, one of the best companies in the world from an employer branding perspective, because they really understood from the get-go that it's not about HR, it's not an HR-driven sort of enterprise, it's cross-functional. That's the most critical thing.
That's really interesting. So taking it out of HR, where the vast majority of the time employer branding is put under that HR bracket, that it has to be a HR function, and yet a lot of the tactical work, the strategy actually isn't developed really inside HR. And HR doesn't usually have the budget for it either. Sure. So did it used to sit within HR and you just wrangled it out of there, or did it always it just never existed, therefore you were able to place it in the right place?
Well, it hadn't really had a home, and it still sits in HR. So just sort of to clarify, I suppose my role and people doing employer branding now at Unilever, we still sit in HR, but we work very closely with other functions. And to your point, HR doesn't have the biggest budgets, but even a Unilever, other big corporates that do this amazingly well, like Dell and GE, L'Oreal, they've got budgets. We've got big budgets, but the success is based on working with other functions, because you recognise the content you're sharing can't just be about recruitment. There's nothing more dull. Who wants to just follow an Instagram or a Twitter where it's just about jobs? Yeah. So it sort of sits in HR, and I've got peers who sit in communications, sit in marketing, but I think wherever it sits, you have to work across different functions. It's a recipe for a disaster when it doesn't.
Yeah.
When you don't.
So that's one of the biggest kind of misconceptions, I suppose, about the employer branding and what kind of content you're sharing. Should it be about jobs? Should it be about the people who work here and how great it is to work here, and what should they actually say? So at Ferrero, you're relatively at the beginning stages of developing this strategy within Ferrero. And is this a global remit as well that you're with? Or?
Yeah, sure. So at Ferrero, we're very much where I was at Unilever about 7 years ago, where there's certainly an understanding of employer branding. We have an employer brand globally, and we've got a fantastic award-winning video that was created 2.5-3 years ago. But there's a sort of a level of appreciation now internally that I've helped generate, that we certainly have to be much more aware of the cultural nuances, and we have to be much more aware of not just personalisation but content. So what I mean by that is I'm building a framework for employer branding. There isn't an end product that I'm going to say, okay, 30 countries, talent managers, HR directors, recruiters, use this, because I simply can't know that in China or in India we might be looking for digital e-commerce talent, but in Germany and Italy we might be looking for retail talent. Those are just examples. So it has to be activated by the countries, but I'm building a framework. So I think the kind of the journey that Ferrero on is understanding that employer branding is a living and breathing thing. You don't go, it's done.
Yeah.
And secondly, it's again cross-functional work. Content has to be constantly replenished. It's working across different channels, recognizing which channels work for different territories. So when I'm working with America and China and the UK, I'm actually thinking about a different channel strategy. And that's because the audiences are perhaps looking for not just different things, but are in different spaces. Yeah. So yeah, very different space, different maturity level. But that's what's exciting. And what's wonderful about working for a Unilever, a Primark, a Ferrero, is they may be in different spaces, but they are organisations that have got brands that are instantly recognisable. You just need to tune them up.
Yeah, absolutely. So with like massively growing brands like Primark, for example, sure. Very close to my heart because it's an Irish company, although most people wouldn't realise it. So for a company like Primark, which is going into markets where it never existed before, and they're having store openings which have 100,000 people waiting outside on the street, and they literally sell out of all the stock on the first day type of thing. How do you encapsulate that in the like of employer brand for people to actually want to work there, not just shop there? What's the difference?
Yeah, and it's a really good question, because I think Primark is actually very similar to the Ferrero story, where the maturity level and the appreciation is still new. And actually one of the things I did at Primark was help them launch their employer brand in the USA. They went into the USA sort of 2 years ago now. And it was recognising three things. First of all, yes, it's an Irish company, but it's not a known brand in America, so you can't go in with the same tone of voice and the same attitude that everyone knows who we are. Secondly, the people we're trying to touch are a discerning bunch, and there's a lot of noise out there in America. There's lots of noise everywhere, but there's a lot of noise in America. It's a very fragmented environment, so we had to recognise that going into Boston, going into New York, we had to do a different nuance to our approach. And I built my knowledge by doing research with an external company, because I needed to know what do people in Boston look for versus what do people in New York look for. Absolutely. And also the channels. And then thirdly, what was really key to your point is that we're launching a consumer brand. We want people to buy those jumpers and those jeans and those tops, but also come and work for us. So we were able to cleverly, by working internally, mix the store opening PR, the store opening momentum, with the kind of, we need people to come and be store managers, retail advisors, yada, yada, yada. So again, that took a lot of close working, but it was research first, because when you're an unknown brand, you only get one chance to actually get it right. And interestingly, 8 months later, we launched in Italy. And again, there were some lessons learned, but we certainly, I absolutely didn't do the same thing in Italy that I did in America. That would have been foolish.
So what needed to happen in Italy? What were some of the things that you learned from the US that you're like, okay, that went down a bomb. Sure. Shall we try it? Should we experiment in Italy, or did we just learn altogether that didn't work?
I think one of the things I'll use Primark as an example is it's a very PR-led business, and an Irish very strong Irish heritage where digital was relatively new. So we've got a lot of digital on the consumer side, but digital from a branding perspective and employer branding perspective is completely new. So there was sort of talk about doing radio, which again, it's very hard to sort of convince people that's not going to work. You always need to go use it and see what happens. So in America, we tried, yes, I do love a good pilot. Let's do a bit of A/B testing. So, we did a pilot because again, it's not about Charu doesn't think we should do this, it's about research. And you have to be careful when you're talking to people that have worked in a very successful business for 20 years about going, no, it's all about Instagram. And so going back to what we did differently in America and Italy was we recognised, again, based on research and what others had done, and also using actual consumer research based in Italy, that it was very much around footfall. So campaigns we did to launch that brand were based on actually people doing things on the street, which I wouldn't have done in America. So kind of actually the old-fashioned retro way, we're opening in that arcade in 3 months' time, come and talk to us. SMS messaging was done in both territories, and I'm a big fan.
We always think that text messages are dead, but it's something that I personally live by. It's just text messaging all day. So from big consumer brands to brands that people would consider, they might know Ferrero Rocher and Nutella, but I never knew that they ran Thornton's. So how do you get those different brand perspectives apart? Same with Unilever as well. You're like, well, which laundry detergent does Unilever have? Which one is the opposite with P&G? And is there a unified place where all those stories live?
Yeah, so I'll use Unilever as an example because it's a dialogue that I lived and breathed for at least 10 or 11 months. And again, I was really fortunate that I worked really closely with marketing. I became very good friends with the marketing people, and I learnt from them. So that, I tested ideas with them. So my original thinking at the time, I'll bring Facebook to life, was, okay, can we use the Facebook brand presences that you have for Dove and Ben & Jerry's, yada, yada, yada. And actually, when you kind of play that out, it made more sense to have a Facebook careers presence, which is again, where all those stories about careers live. Yeah. What they do and what I'll be doing at Ferrero is making sure we can seed in some of the content that you're using on those Facebook brand pages. Certainly be very armed with when you have questions on the careers page that are related to the brands or related to controversial images, or related to, let's say palm oil, you have got answers, because a consumer or a candidate is not going to go, this is a careers page and this is it's a consumer page. They're just going to see, in this case, Unilever or Ferrero. Yeah. And then to your point about Ferrero, or actually any company where, whether it's a GSK or a Procter & Gamble, where the brands underneath are more known than the parent company. Ferrero is never going to be an organisation, certainly in the next 2-3 years, where that Ferrero name is going to be omnipresent on everything. Unilever made a concerted choice to do that, and I think it was the right thing to do. Ferrero is a family-owned company, but we certainly have a lot of brand stories that we want to be telling, and we will be telling under the employer brand space. Working for a Thornton's, it's a legacy company, it's a much loved company in the UK. We should talk about actually our amazing integration. We should talk about the products, the sort of fantastic care that we take. In the same way that, we'll talk about the fact that it takes 18 hours to make a Tic Tac. I mean, the care and the efficiency and the pride that Ferrero takes in all its products is remarkable.
So, okay, I learned lots of things today. Not only does it take 18 hours to own a Tic Tac, but Ferrero owns Tic Tac. So there you go. So, I mean, that's the thing when it comes to those employer brands. It's a struggle sometimes when you come from that outside perspective to actually be able to simply associate that employer with the things that we all know and love and touch, and that very tactile, tangible thing. So when you're getting grads in, or the millennial generation, I suppose, and something that I find particularly in graduate recruitment is that the pride of being able to brag to your friends, I work for that company, and them knowing straight away, if you were to say I work for Primark, people would instantly go, oh my God, I love Primark, I shop there all the time.
Depends on what country though, because as you said, in Dublin and in Ireland, working for Primark, amazing, but going to America, not so much yet. It's still a very young brand.
True, unless you're a shopper there, and that's the thing. So when you launch in Germany and it's just doing so well, launching in the Netherlands and a few other places, the brand really is superseded by the fact that people love to shop there. And it is all the same story. So have you any advice maybe for companies who have that parent company above and really, really well-known brands underneath? Or perhaps it's flipped the other way around. Perhaps it's different product segments which they just don't have as much recognition over. How they can bolster their employer brand, what tactics they might take.
Yeah, I think the first thing to take from this conversation actually is just a nugget. You have to be aware on actually what the brand positioning is in that territory or with that population or graduates, because immediately, and again, it's very reminiscent of a conversation I'd have at Primark, because you're from Ireland, and immediately your baseline is, well, everyone would want to work for Primark because you're proud of the brand and your friends, your peers, and you can't go into employer branding thinking that. So that's why research is so important. Whether it's research about the type of role you're trying to hire, because that perception might not exist. A visual merchandiser would absolutely want to go and work for a Primark. Who wouldn't? But maybe a retail person's going, actually, my values are more John Lewis. So I think it's based on research. Never make a presumption, ever. So research by talking to your employees. What do they feel? So we're now going into employee value proposition territory, but also looking at external sources. Whether it's Indeed, Glassdoor, talking to people that have come for jobs, haven't come for jobs. You'll find that most companies, and we're talking about big companies now, even companies that are mid-size, actually spend a lot of money, maybe not in HR, but in comms and PR, media relations, doing research about what's their reputation, because it's so important now. Actually learning that is really key before you start investing in channels, before you start investing in what is it we want to do. It's that whole research piece, because the presumption often is, and Ferrero is Italian, Unilever is Anglo-Dutch, is everyone loves us or everyone knows who we are. Well, actually, they often don't. And there's a massive piece of work often that needs to be done around awareness, and then you think about consideration. Companies sometimes make the mistake of going straight into the tactics about considering. Well, if that graduate isn't aware of you as a brand, how can they possibly consider you?
Sure. So from that fact-finding mission and gathering awareness, what facts have you uncovered about Ferrero, perhaps, that maybe they're internal, maybe it's external perception, that we feel these are the things I need to focus on first?
Sure. So I think that whole piece around, we work very much like most big corporates, we work very much with Universum, which is the leading employer branding talent employer branding agency. So they issue some rankings every year for the companies that are most well known in the graduate space, global rankings. And you use those as your benchmark, but also it gives you a lot of research about how people in the graduate space consider you.
Sure.
So from a Ferrero perspective, or indeed from a Unilever perspective, the information you get is, what do people think about different elements, whether it's your culture, whether it's your mobility, whether it's your values, whether it's your products. And it's very obvious, having just heard you saying, I didn't know that we own Tic Tac, is and it's a deliberate policy of Ferrero is we want to be known by our products versus our corporate identity. As I said, that's very much an ethos of Ferrero, and it's one that's come from the top, and it's not something I'm going to be able to change, and
Sure.
Nor should I. But I think it's that recognizing that people and the products are the two biggest ingredients that we need to play on. People are, very obvious. Why would I want to go and work for an organisation where I can't see what the people are like? Do they look like me? Do they feel, do their values integrate with what I'm looking for? Always worries me when you look at a career site and there's no pictures of the people or videos of the people speaking. Because that's sort of, why not?
Images.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Models, actors.
Which I'm sure they work there.
Exactly.
So, was that the case at Ferrero, that they perhaps didn't have the showcasing of the people who work there at the time?
So in some locations we do, in Italy, absolutely, which is the parent, the main base. Where Ferrero is born very proudly, and it's part of the work that I'm doing and will do is really have a richer employer brand that's more segmented, per country, and using quite rightly our products, because those are things that people, when they find out we own Nutella, because not everyone does know that, they're excited by it because they're very loved brands.
Absolutely.
And part of the journey that I'm on, and I'm incredibly lucky, is our marketing digital heads. They are the people that I've become friends with, allies with deliberately, because I've learnt from my Unilever role that when you're allies with them, and you both benefit. So absolutely, the content they're creating, quite rightly, HR will never have the same budget, but actually being able to share the content that they do on their love brands, on the brands that we've just talked about, whether it's Tic Tac or Nutella or Kinder or Rocher, we can take advantage of, as long as everyone understands the objective. I'm not there trying to sell products. It might be a byproduct, but that's not what I'm trying to do.
Sure.
I'm trying to, I think in the world of employer branding, it's sharing as much as you can so that people either want to work with you because they feel this is the right place, or decide not to because they know enough about you to go, I'm not going to apply for a job there. I'll still eat your products. I still love your products, but I've recognised enough from what you're sharing via your job description, your job adverts, your
Two
videos.
very different things.
Very different things, and don't get me started on that. That's a whole different interview. But it's one of my bosses used to say at BP, if you can do as much deselection by your employer branding, the better, really.
So that's controversial in a sense, like something that I would recognize easily enough, I suppose, because I'm in this space of listening to thought leaders and from your tweets and you know, the likes of Bill Borman and others who would be, you know, it's not, you don't really want to attract more people in, you actually want to get less people applying, people saying I don't want to apply.
Yes.
Is that controversial when you're actually saying that to hiring managers? We actually want less people to apply, or are they appreciative of that?
I think to start off with, it fills them with horror, because it's that old, you know, I start off in recruitment, I've seen a perfect candidate, but I want to see 4 more. And it's educating them, okay, well, you might do, but that perfect candidate will have picked up 3 other offers. Yeah. So is it controversial? Probably, both with some HR people as well, actually. You know, if you're in an environment where volume is best, that fills you with fear. I want to see as many people as possible. But I think, you know, good employer branding tells a story enough about, okay, I want to work for this company or I don't. And you know, there's some people, you know, that we see on Twitter that say big companies don't need to do employer branding. Actually, that's complete rubbish, because we'll still have a perception of a company, whether it's big or small. And you know, you have to promote and talk and engage in this world digitally, and you know, conferences are still very key, career sites, engaging with universities. But I think it's, you know, scary for hiring managers, it's scary for HR, but you have to be in a situation where you say, look, it's about the right people. The trick is, and that's where good workforce planning comes, that, you know, what are the right people? Who do we want? What type of people are looking for? It's not about cloning, but what type of people will succeed here? What type of people do we want here? What type of people should we be attracting? And challenging that. Part of my role anywhere, you know, you shouldn't hire me if you want somebody that's going to say yes all the time, is challenging. Does this make sense? Why are we doing this? You know, that's kind of one of my mantras.
So from a, that's really interesting. Would you ever consider the role of employer brand to be a link maybe between that kind of business function head of HR, where we have to understand not only do we need people in the business and they have to be happy and they have to want to work here and all that kind of thing, and also looking at, well, you know, don't just give me the 12-month remit in terms of the people that you need to hire, maybe give me more forward planning, you know, very much a strategic workforce plan of like, where do we want to grow, what territories we want to grow in, maybe we should start building those pipelines now, or is it more of a marketing based role, or is it that link between the two?
I think it's a link between the two. I think, Holly, what would be amazing, and some companies do this, you know, I think that's that kind of nirvana, is actually look at it from a planning perspective. Let's use an example. I'm literally just making it up, but if you did know that actually in 14 months' time you were going to be opening an office or building a sort of a retail network in China, for example, if that head of employer branding knew that in advance, just like the business heads will and the board do, you know, knowing that, you then can build awareness. And that would be magical, because that building awareness, often you don't have the time to do that. But if you have that 12-month leeway to do campaign, to do your research, to be building and knitting a story for the talent, in this case China, and then, you know, the 6 months before the shops start opening, you have
a ready stream of talent already interested.
Yeah, or the sort of the stream of talent may not be talked about those particular jobs, but at least when we start doing campaigns that are more recruitment related, because there is a difference between doing an employer brand campaign and a recruitment marketing campaign, they are much more likely to go, okay, well, I know who they are now, or they're not. Who is this? We still need to do a sell, we still need to engage, but absolutely it would be nirvana if you had that type of oversight. But to your other point, and maybe I'm asking for everything and the cherry on the cake, is also having that marketing lens. But I think the difference is, for me, if you and I had been talking when I was at Unilever or had just left Unilever, I would say this role should sit in marketing. I actually think sitting more closely with communications, sitting in internal communications, external communications, because I now learn, or, you know, I'm studying and learning every day more from external communications people who know how to do campaigns, who know how to measure campaigns, who talk about tone of voice, not in the way that we do in HR, which is just a buzzword. We don't really understand it in many cases. But for me, it's sort of the marketing piece I've learned, and I'm still learning, and I still enjoy. But I think communications, knowing how to segment, knowing how to run a really good campaign elegantly, but with results, I think we can learn a lot from kind of really good communications leaders.
Yeah, that's really interesting, actually. I think that a lot of people would pick the communications team or that particular desk or pod to really sit with and learn a lot from. But I think you're dead right, really. Something actually quite interesting that you were saying about that difference between a recruitment marketing campaign and employer branding campaign. A lot of TA leaders would actually pit them really as the same thing. Are they you were saying they're absolutely quite different. So what is those differences between the two?
Sure. I mean, there is a symbiotic relationship between the two of them, and of course they should be.
Sure.
But the conclusions and the objectives are different. So if you think about the 5 different steps, and once you've done your EVP, if you're trying to raise brand awareness, create an employer brand, who are we? What is our story? What's our purpose? That can be very closely linked to the kind of the corporate purpose. That can be very much, that's your employer brand, that's your DNA, that's your secret sauce, as they used to say at Primark. And that's very much a campaign-led activity, and it's an always-on activity. It's a mix of both. So I'm saying that genuinely. A campaign has a short shelf span, but you should finish one and think about what the next one should be, because it should have a different objective, and different measurables and different results, and so on and so forth. But that's kind of your constant stream. You should always be trying to promote your employer brand and measuring it using social listening, sentiment analysis, internal pulse surveys, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The list is sort of endless. Yeah. But recruitment marketing, in my opinion, often you blur the lines, and that's where it's very hard to then measure. So let's use a recruitment marketing campaign. Okay, I'm going to be needing to hire 100 graduates next year, and I need to focus on STEM talent, because who isn't? So that would be a campaign, because you're raising the awareness via employer branding activity. But the campaign would be very much targeting on okay, we need to maybe tap into some influencers that talk about STEM careers, not about this company to start off with, but why are STEM careers important? Then we need to be thinking about which are the best university to go to, not just the obvious ones, which the best one, again, research. Then we need to be thinking about, okay, it's about hiring the people, where are they going to be? It's, very, very much a focused, discrete project about hiring. That's recruitment marketing, much more tactical, much more about execution, much more about, okay, if I'm doing a campaign, making sure that my campaign and my job adverts, my Google Analytics are linking into how many hits are coming to the page. It's very much using, and I sound like I'm going to be buzzword bingo here, but programmatic. If I'm working with an agency to be doing and executing a recruitment marketing campaign, I want to be quite agile. There we go, bingo. To constantly
get lean in there as well.
Exactly, why not? A bit of agile. So I think the difference is recruitment marketing is a lot more of a tactical, short-term exercise with goals and sort of objectives that are very easy to measure. Very clear,
very obvious results as well.
Yeah, exactly.
I suppose an employer branding one, we were talking about sentiment analysis, which maybe relatively new. It's a very marketing-y type of term about how somebody feels about your brand. How do you change minds about how people feel about your brand when it comes to working there? What are some of the ways we can, we're not all Google.
No.
None of us are Google except Google. And when you're competing against Google, people have very different feelings about what Google is. So how do you change people's minds about that and change that sentiment?
Yeah, and I think I don't want to give the impression, because I think it's a wrong one, that creating an employer brand doesn't have measurables. So I absolutely, if I'm investing in something, I want to be able to say this is how well we've done, and if we're doing better than someone else, that's important too. So it's competitive benchmarking, saying we want to be X in such and such rankings. If it's UK, there's top places to work, Sunday Times and so on. Yeah. There are employer branding absolutely has measurables, and so it should, and those are very important to me when you start a project to kind of earmark those. But to your point about sentiment analysis, I think we can get so hung up about we're not Google, or we want to be Facebook, or we want to be the latest tech company that's out there because we've heard the myth of their interview process. And we can't be all those companies, and nor should we want to. I think what we have to be is very clear on why someone should work here, past the blandness and the genericness that often gets spouted in employer branding. But why should Holly come and work for X company? And it has to be personal, but it also has to have context, because it's not just about a personalised story, but give you the context behind it. And also recognise that that sentiment analysis, some people's you can never change. So you need to put people into different layers in terms of, do you want to be spending all your money and your efforts, your energy, changing the mind of someone that's never going to want to work for you, or actually investing your time and your energy and your money, I think I've just said that, but on the people that are still undecided. So that comes back to that consideration and awareness funnel, and I do love a good funnel. Everybody in employer branding.
Yeah.
So I think it's sort of it's measuring the sentiment. You cannot do this without employee advocates, and advocates is just a fancy word of saying people that want to come and work for us. You know, that when they go and talk to the person that's saying, I work for X company for a year in the pub or in Starbucks having a coffee, when no one's listening, would they say, yeah, come and work here, it's a great company to work for? And I think, and I know some people are debating this at the moment, that you can have one employer brand and it should be the same. I am a fan of having a sub employer brand, because I think that the story, the sell, the proposition to the visual merchandisers that should come and work for you in London versus the retail staff that you want to attract in Scotland, or the engineers that you want to attract in Delhi, have to be a different story. You should recognise the umbrella employer brand, but the drivers, the motivators of me are very different to somebody that's looking as the first job out of university. So you have that sub brand. It's a very long-winded answer to say, you rely on sentiment analysis, but also your internal feedback. Glassdoor is the best listening device there is. Companies that don't listen, don't look, don't review, don't respond, why aren't we doing that? Why aren't you doing that? But I think it's constant. You can. It's a long game.
It is, and it's one that has incredibly positive results that could come out of this as well. So, your project with Ferrero is definitely a long-term one, and the scope is amazing, I suppose. Is there, what are the dreams that people can aspire towards when it comes to this employer brand? If we were to start a project tomorrow morning, how long should that project last? What team composition should it be made of? What kind of things should we be looking to get towards? If it's that benchmarking, find out where we are, what should we be aiming to move in a year's time, maybe?
Yeah. So I'll take the composition of an employer brand team, just put a pin in it for a minute. But I think, what do we want to achieve is as you said, the first question. Because if it is about recruitment marketing, or we're finding that we've got lots of visitors to our career sites or our job boards with very little quality candidates coming through, actually, is it your employer brand you're looking to work on, or is it actually creating a much better candidate experience, hiring manager experience, job adverts versus job descriptions? Are you hunting the right place? Because it might not be that your employer branding is what's letting you down. Mm-hmm. So I think, again, research, don't make assumptions. Are you actually thinking about doing something that's not needed yet? But if you are trying to strengthen your employer brand, and ultimately we all have an employer brand, whether you're a small company in Swindon or a massive enterprise with a headquarters in Luxembourg, your employer brand is what people feel about you and think about you. And if they don't even think about you, feel about you, that's still your employer brand, because it's your unknown. But what you should do and how long it should be is like asking what's how long a piece of string is. It's ongoing. You don't finish this exercise, but you can have certain goals. So you start with your research, you start with your employee value proposition, you start with, what do we stand for? What are the pillars that we stand for? What's our people promise? What are we saying to people internally that's making them stay?
That's realistic as well.
Yeah, that's realistic. Bit of aspiration, but definitely realistic, because we've all heard of companies or perhaps worked at them, and I certainly have, where it's a very glossy, shiny employer brand, and you come in and realise that it's terrible. So yes, and there's a fantastic blog post by a lady called Rachel Miller, who I learn an awful lot from. She's a comms person, and she says about it's the coffee mug story. If you go for an interview and you're handed a beautiful coffee mug, China cup and saucer, and then when you're going through and everyone else is paper mugging it, paper glassing it, that sort of tells you something in terms of, are you being treated incredibly differently, and is it sort of what's the story? Ask and probe. But in terms of the composition, so I guess timeline I've answered. I don't think you can sit there and say, okay, after 6 months or 11 months it's done. Certainly there's things that you can have achieved by that time, whether it's thinking about your channel strategy on social, or looking at your career site, or thinking about your framework of messaging. For me, if you're going to do one thing, one thing, and it's simple, look at your job adverts. It's the sort of biggest glimpse into your brand. More often than not, people will land on your job adverts because they're hosted in your ATS, and skip that beautiful campaign on social media, or skip that career site that you've invested millions on. And if your job adverts are terrible, which most are, start there. Start there. Invest in a copywriter. Invest in a course. Think about that. Words are magic. You can tell so many amazing stories with them, and we simply do such a bad job. It's terrible. But the composition of an employer brand, and so that's why it's a subject of another talk, because for me, job adverts, I've been talking about this for 14 years now, and we still, we're not getting better. But the composition of an employer branding team, obviously, should be very closely linked to your recruitment teams. Because what are you trying to do? You're trying to get the right people in the right place at the right time. So those teams are, and the employer branding team is, providing a function to that, creating awareness, helping those teams, the recruitment teams, do campaigns. I think you absolutely need to have somebody that fundamentally understands digital and social media, because you can outsource this, and why wouldn't you? I'm a big fan of some of the agencies I'm both currently working with and have worked with in all my roles. Yeah. But in order to get great results, you need to give great briefs, and you need to understand social, and it's not enough to say, I understood it a year ago, you have to keep on top of this. So I think understanding digital, the whole team needs to understand that, but you need an expert. I love the way that Deloitte do things. They've actually got an in-house agency team, they've got copywriters that sprinkle magic on their adverts in the most case. I think it's really important to have both in the HR function, but definitely in this team, or the wider talent, employer branding function, an analytics person. Because again, it's all metrics. It's, how are we doing? How are we spending this money? It's not about a lovely dashboard that no one understands. And recognise that your stakeholders, might think this is beautiful, but you need to make a narrative of it. Why are we now pushing everything on Instagram versus, abandoning our LinkedIn licenses that we bought 10 years ago or 5 years ago because they're not worth the money anymore? So I think it's sort of as an analytics. You could steal some time of the HR analytics person in that function. Somebody that understands digital, someone who understands marketing. I think, have a research partner, but also talk to people. So, it's amazing how many companies, and I'm sure you work with them, where, we need to hire graduates in New York, and then we should do this, and this, an intern in sitting in that meeting with you, it's a big meeting, and it's, have you spoken to the intern that's been working with you for 4 months about, do they use Snapchat, or are we just believing our agency? Because often they turn on and go, actually, I use Facebook for news, and I do this and do that. So talk to people.
Yeah, our persona is actually reflecting of the people that we've developed.
Exactly.
Definitely.
So does that answer your question?
It does, and many others as well. Yeah, fascinating. Charu, that is pretty much all we have time for, I'm afraid. I really want to go on for at least another 2 hours and stay in this beautiful room in Faber, but unfortunately we have to go. No. But thank you so much. That has been an absolute delight. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Holly.
Cheers. Thanks.